the sound of metal scraping stone, an archaeologist's trowel catching something that should not have been there. Under the pale sun of northern Iraq, where dust moves like memory in the wind, a woman named Dr. Helena Strauss crouched in what had once been a palace courtyard. The air smelled of old copper and rain on salt. For weeks her team had been unearthing tiles and tablets, but this object, this one, made every hand freeze. Buried beneath 4,000 years of empire was a slab of gypsum, faintly green with corrosion, carved in delicate relief. But the image was no scene of kings triumphant or gods feasting. It was a woman, bound at the wrists, her head lowered, her mouth open as if caught mid-scream. Behind her, a figure taller than all the rest, a king of Assyria, beard sculpted in deliberate curls, hand raised not in blessing, but in command. Around them, lines of cuneiform wound like snakes, detailing something intimate, something judicial, something unspeakable. Dr. Strauss whispered for the photographer. One flash, then another. Dust fluttered down. The dig site fell silent except for the desert wind moving through frayed tent fabric. Later that night inside the canvas lab tent, her translator, a local scholar named Rafiq, read slowly from a rubbing of the inscription. His voice trembled at first, then steadied, as though each word carried both duty and dread. In the reign of Ashur-bel-kala, he translated, the women who defied the palace, wives, concubines, and seers, were brought before the throne. Their bodies became the mirror of their sin, to be made example before the city. Helena looked up. What kind of punishments? Rafiq hesitated. Then he lowered his eyes to the tablet again. They were unthinkable. He did not say the rest aloud, but the descriptions, scrawled in microscopic precision, would later fade entire rooms into silence at the British Museum. Some lines spoke of walls built from human bone, others of public rituals where the condemned were adorned in their own hair, turned into living effigies for the gods. Yet more disturbing than the acts themselves was the implication. These weren't ordinary sentences of death. They were instruments of fear, designed to control women who might speak out, predict futures, or challenge royal decree. The tablets were not chronicles of madness, but of policy. And it begged a question: why had a civilization so advanced, so proud of its libraries and laws, codified punishments so monstrous they made even their enemies avert their eyes? Before anyone could answer, the storm came. It rose suddenly out of the desert before dawn, like the ghosts of those same women rushing home. Tents tore, crates fell. When the sun returned, one storage trunk was gone, the very one containing that first relief. The artifact's loss would trigger investigations in 3 continents, a security scandal among antiquities dealers, and, some say, a curse upon those who sought the truth of it. But the story did not end there. It merely began, because in the fragment left behind, a single line survived, pressed by a hand that might once have belonged to the punished themselves. It read, trembling across time, "She will remember what they forgot, the cost of their mercy." And that line would pull historians, journalists, and even priests into a 4,000-year mystery of cruelty, silence, and faith. The story of the punishments inflicted on women by Assyrian kings. Before we continue with the story of the vanished artifact and the empire that shaped it, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. The story takes us back to the empire that called itself immortal. Northern Mesopotamia around 900 BCE, a land between rivers that gleamed like molten silver under the sun. The smell of bitumen thickened the streets. Reeds cracked underfoot along the Tigris, where fishermen shouted in guttural tongues. Vast walls of limestone rose around the city of Ashur, each block dragged by slaves who sang rhythmic laments of obedience. Scribes hunched over clay tablets in temple courtyards, their nails pressing wedges into wet earth. Inside the palace, sandalwood smoke curled beneath ceilings painted with hunting scenes. Bronze lions guarded doorways. Winged bulls flanked the throne. And everywhere there was noise, trumpets from the gates, chanting from the ziggurat, and the ceaseless hum of bureaucracy. Assyria was no mere kingdom. It was an organism, devouring lands and lives alike. Its kings were semi-divine executors of justice, their will parallel to the gods. To question them was treason, to disobey, sacrilege. The law extended from the palace into every home, whispering through husbands into their wives, through masters into their slaves. The Assyrians recorded everything: lists of tribute, names of conquered peoples, inventories of spoils, and, most disturbingly, punishments decreed in the name of divine order. Scholars call these the Middle Assyrian laws, carved between 1450 and 1100 BCE, later copied and refined for generations. Among them lie the dictates concerning women, codes that bound their bodies, voices, and even gestures. A wife who contradicted her husband could be mutilated publicly. A widow caught with a lover might be impaled before her house. Servant girls faced branding for garments not sanctioned by their station. And priestesses, the very conduits of sacred wisdom, could be scourged or shorn for misreading omens that displeased the royal astrologers. But brutal as these decrees sound, they weren't written in chaos. They were meticulously organized. The Assyrians saw justice as symmetry. Each crime reflected its punishment as the moon reflects the sun. To them, the violation of order by a woman was not small. It was cosmic. To correct it required blood and spectacle. Imagine standing in Nineveh at dawn, 740 BCE. The sun is a red coin rising over the outer gates. Vendors drag their wares through the dust. Figs, copper trinkets, dried fish. You pass the market near the Ishtar temple, where incense burns so thick your eyes water. Above, on a balcony carved with lapis mosaics, the royal herald steps forward to read a decree. His cry pierces the murmur of the city. By order of the king, let justice be made visible. From the upper courtyard comes the shuffle of guards escorting a veiled figure. The crowd falls silent. Beneath the veil, a woman's shoulders tremble, though her stride remains steady. She will be punished for prophecy, they say. She predicted drought when the astrologers promised rain. To the onlookers, it is not entertainment, but necessity. Justice must be seen to keep the wheel turning. For every witness, the warning is clear. The boundaries of obedience are sharper than the knife at her throat. Assyria's splendor in stone and gold was built on this fear. Behind its monumental art, the scenes of kings fighting lions, the triumphal processions, lay the quiet terror of domestic life. Women learned to lower their eyes, to speak softly, to hide knowledge that might be construed as arrogance. And still, whispers persisted in private courtyards. Daughters born under unlucky stars, noble wives accused by rivals, priestesses who claimed they heard the goddess Ishtar weep at night. Behind palace walls, queens and concubines waged their own invisible wars of loyalty and deception, where rumor could kill faster than disease. In the archives of Kalhu, modern Nimrud, tablets list the provisions for the royal harem: elaborate perfumes, dyes, tobacco-like herbs imported from the Levant. But among these accounts lie annotations, tiny notes in the margins about rebel tongues silenced. Historians debate whether that phrase referred to spies, courtesans, or perhaps something worse. When Assyria began to crumble centuries later, its enemies did not merely destroy statues. They smashed faces, erased names, and burned the rooms that held female portraits. To kill a memory was to kill twice. And yet, what the empire sought to bury has outlived it. Clay endures. Each fired tablet carries confessions carved by hands long dust. And in their surviving fragments lies a secret the kings could not erase. The women spoke first. They prophesied wars, resisted decrees, wrote laments that threaded divine defiance into prayer. Many paid in blood, and the tablets of punishment, now exhumed one by one, whisper of their agony and their strange power. In the modern age, archaeologists and historians have wrestled with these contradictions. How could the same civilization that built the world's first library also codify the mutilation of its own women? How could poetry and torture inhabit the same breath? Dr. Strauss would later write in her field notes, Assyria's cruelty was not the failure of civilization, it was its price. Order required spectacle, and its victims were stage props in the theater of power. But her notebook, like the missing artifact, did not survive unscathed. Within months of the discovery, both vanished from the dig's inventory. Some blamed looters, others an internal scandal. Yet in 2003, a London art dealer anonymously surrendered fragments of an Assyrian plaque whose description matched the lost one almost exactly. On it, faint but legible under modern light filters, was an image nearly identical to the first: the kneeling woman, the king, the inscription of judgment. Yet beneath the final cuneiform line, there appeared a new carving unseen in any known artifact, a small symbol resembling an eye, open and watching. No record in Mesopotamian epigraphy catalogs this sign. Some researchers dismissed it as decorative. Others whispered that it appeared not in the stone's original composition, but etched later, perhaps by one of the punished themselves. A line note found taped beneath the fragment in the British Museum's holding vault reads simply, "She sees still." To those familiar with Assyrian theology, that phrase carried an unsettling double meaning. The goddess Ishtar, patron of fertility and war, was said to see through veils. Her favored priestesses, known as the Musalatu, were interpreters of dreams and omens. In times of crisis, they could unmake the king's authority with a single prophecy. Ishtar's sight was both blessing and curse. Those who bore it often suffered visions they could not escape, visions of rivers turning to blood, of walls toppling, of nations drowning in their own cruelty. Later kings, uneasy with the power of these women, redefined their sacred role into one of subservience. The line between revered oracle and condemned witch blurred until it vanished entirely. The eyes of the goddess, one Assyrian chronicle claims, must be dimmed, lest they behold what the king cannot control. The punishments that followed were not random. They were rituals designed to close the eye, to seal prophecy forever. And maybe when Dr. Strauss uncovered that relief, she opened it again. Because from that moment forward, those who handled the surviving fragments would report dreams repeating the same image. A kneeling figure, bound and whispering, "Remember." 4,000 years separate us, but memory in stone travels further than mercy. The Assyrian kings carved their triumphs deep into the earth, yet even their power eroded beneath sand and time. What remained, what survived when monuments fell, were the stories of the silenced. In them resounds the echo of empire, not as glory, but as warning. They called her the woman who listened to ghosts. In the records recovered from the vaults of Nineveh, she appears first as a name without lineage. Tamarat. Her title, however, is preserved, Musalatu, dream seer of the Ishtar temple. She lived in the later reign of Ashur-bel-kala around 1070 BCE, when the kingdom's borders shimmered like mirages, expanding and collapsing with each campaign. She was said to have hair the color of damp clay and eyes faded pale from staring too long at divine fires. Temple scribes noted that she rarely ate, subsisting on dates, incense smoke, and water drawn from Ishtar's well before dawn. She terrified some, enthralled others, and she carried secrets that could unmake the palace. Inside the high precinct of the goddess, Tamarat stood each morning before the bronze lamps as the priests murmured hymns. The air hung heavy with burning myrrh. On the 7th day of 1 month, its name erased by later scribes, she claimed the goddess spoke. She wept, Tamarat told the high priest, her voice quivering. She said a storm rises from the east. The king's heart will harden, and his city will bleed, as women bled before her altars. The priest, an older man with dust-white beard, named Nebuchadnezzar, frowned. You bring ill words into holy hearing. I bring truth, she replied. Would you rather the goddess remain silent? He lowered his voice, glancing toward the curtains shielding the courtyard. The palace ears are everywhere. If these words reach the scribes, they will record blasphemy, not prophecy. Tamarat looked up at the clay ceiling where smoke twisted like serpents trying to flee. Then let them call it blasphemy. The goddess sees, Nebuchadnezzar whispered, almost pleading. Child, you play with thunder. She smiled faintly. Thunder loved her once. That same week, a letter arrived for the priests, written on silk instead of clay, sealed with the royal emblem of a lion's paw. The messenger bowed low and retreated without a word. The letter ordered the presence of one seer who claims to hear the goddess. Within 2 days, Tamirat walked under guard to the palace of Kalku. Inside, the women's quarters were a world of golden tension. Beneath lattice screens, wives and concubines moved like painted ghosts, their feet bare on polished stone. Each belonged to the king, yet each feared the others more than death itself. For the slightest rumor, a whispered prophecy of betrayal or drought, could condemn a rival. Among them ruled Queen Iltani. She came from a northern tribe once crushed in battle, but brought into the royal house by political marriage. Her gaze could silence the corridor faster than the sound of a whip. To her servants she was both protector and tyrant. To the king she was something they had yet to name, an equal in deceit. The chroniclers describe Iltani as a woman of unbreakable spine, wrapped in perfumes of cedar and venom. When Tamirat first saw her, the queen stood at the balcony overlooking the training field where soldiers practiced execution drills, a quiet spectacle of loyalty. "You are her mouth?" Iltani asked without turning. "I listen," said Tamirat. "Then listen now," the queen said, voice flat. "The goddess has not served me lately. The king grows restless, and omens speak of rebellion in the west. If you wish to keep that voice of yours, tell me something he cannot ignore." Tamirat hesitated. "The goddess speaks when she wills, not when commanded." At that, the queen turned. Her earrings chimed, a sound too soft to match her tone. "Command? No. Consider it gratitude I offer in advance." Servants brought a bowl of crushed pomegranate seeds and oil. Iltani dipped her fingers, painting the sign of Ishtar across the seer's forehead, star and crescent interlocked. "Now," she whispered, "tell me what you see." Tamirat closed her eyes, and from within her came a sound not of breath, but of wind over distant sand. Long moments passed. Then she spoke, trembling. "I see a king building towers taller than mercy. I see his wives wailing beneath their veils. I see blood spilt into jars of silver." The queen's expression never wavered, though her fingers coiled tight against her robe. "Blood into silver," she murmured. "That is palace law. You speak nothing new." "The blood is yours," Tamirat answered softly. The bowl slipped from Iltani's hand, dark oil splattering across the stone floor like spilled night. That was the first time she feared the slave seer. Further in the palace lived the man who recorded their fates, Saru Atir, the royal scribe. By rank he stood beneath generals, above guards, and roughly beside priests. His ink could destroy reputations faster than a sword. He was precise to the point of obsession, a man who corrected even the king's cuneiform formulations when they strayed from divine grammar. Town rumors depicted him bent-backed and humorless, but his surviving letters reveal wit as sharp as his stylus. In one correspondence to a fellow scribe, he wrote, "Justice written by trembling hands is still justice. What the lions tear, I bind with words." The day after Tamirat's audition before the queen, Saru Atir was ordered to transcribe her prophecy for the king's annals. He began as usual with full ceremony, burning cedar chips, washing his hands thrice, and whispering, "May ink not lie more than man." When Tamirat entered the chamber escorted by guards, he looked up briefly, expecting another frightened priest. Instead, he found a woman staring at his reed pen as though it were a blade. "Do you fear words?" she asked. "I fear the reader," Saru Atir said. "Words themselves only beg to be believed." She smiled, not kindly. "Then you serve a god and a king who feed on belief." He wrote what she said, verbatim, his stylus breathing life into wet clay. He noticed her gaze travel the room, lingering on the shelves of unfinished tablets. Perhaps she wondered how many other lives were trapped there. As the guards led her away, she turned to him. "Write truth," she said. "Truth is what survives sealing," he answered. Her footsteps receded. By sunset, Saru Atir's transcription was delivered to the royal council. That night, drums echoed across the river, summoning judges under torchlight. Something within the text had struck the king like an insult from heaven. The next morning, Nabu-Eddin, the old priest who had once protected Tamirat, was found hanged in his cell by a plait of temple shawls. His death was declared a gift to the gods. The palace shifted tone after that. The air thickened with suspicion. Punishments, once rare spectacles, became daily rites. The queen's ladies whispered through door veils. Scribes spoke only in sanctioned phrases. But not all voices went silent. One belonged to the palace physician, Ashur-nadin, a man of mixed heritage, part Assyrian, part Babylonian, whose accent betrayed neither fully. He wore his humility like armor. To the court he was invisible, to the afflicted, indispensable. He first encountered Tamarat days after her hearing, when she collapsed during a lunar ceremony. Her wrists bore faint burn marks, relics of purification rites, and her breathing stuttered as if her spirit fled halfway through a vision. When she awoke on the physician's cot, night had fallen. The smell of crushed herbs and lamp oil filled the small chamber. "What did they do to me?" she whispered. "Nothing your body cannot heal from," he replied, grinding seeds with a mortar. "Then what of my soul?" Ashur-nadin hesitated, crushing harder until the pestle cracked. "That," he said slowly, "was never my department." She laughed once, a dry, empty sound. He studied her eyes, wide and watchful. "Who burned you?" "The goddess," she said almost kindly. "She wanted me to feel what justice feels like." The physician drew a cloth over her wounds. "Justice does not burn," he murmured. "No," Tamarat said, "but fear does." Within that same year, 2 more court women were executed publicly for unlawful speech. Both had served in the queen's retinue. Each carried, sewn into her garments, a fragment of cuneiform script cut from temple walls. Saru-Atir recorded their deaths without commentary, though one broken draft found among his tablets reads, half erased, "The king has mistaken silence for control." It is unclear who discovered the connection between Tamarat's prophecy and the sudden executions, but whisper became certainty when the queen herself fell ill. Sudden wasting, fever, and a shadowing of the eyes known to ancient physicians as Ishtar's veil. Ashur-nadin tended her daily. At her bedside, between bouts of delirium, Iltani ranted in broken tongues. "They watch from beneath the earth," she rasped once, clutching the physician's wrist. "The women without names, I see them." To calm her, he brewed poppy tea, but she seized the cup and hurled it across the room. "No sleep," she cried. "If I sleep, they will carve me into stone." The next morning, palace criers announced a new royal decree. All female seers and dream readers were to be examined for heresy. Those deemed suspect would undergo purification for the good of the realm. Purification. Everyone knew what that meant. The first to be summoned was Tamarat. Her arrest was not public. Palace guards came to the temple at night while drums masked their footsteps. Saru-Atir, summoned to document the proceedings, arrived shivering in the wind outside the temple gate. He later recalled in his private notes, "She did not cry. She only asked for ink." He gave her a small tablet. She pressed her nail into it, carving a single symbol, the open eye. "To remind," she whispered. Then she allowed them to bind her wrists. Before dawn, the torches burned low along the court of punishment. Soldiers formed a ring as officiants chanted the laws of purity. A priest recited the words of the decree, his voice steady, though tears streaked his face. The queen's window above the courtyard stayed shuttered. Ashur-nadin, forced to stand among the witnesses as court physician, clenched his jaw until his teeth bled. He could treat disease, but not this. Not the sickness of power, convinced of righteousness. The execution inscription was written by Saru-Atir's own hand. In obedience to the word of Ashur-bel-Kala, the voice of disorder is silenced. Thus order prevails. Afterward, he sat long into the night staring at the stylus that had just ended a life. "Truth is what survives sealing," she had told him. He wondered whether that meant truth was already dead. In later centuries, her name nearly vanished. Only one surviving tablet from the ruins of Nineveh still bears her mark. The carved eye repeated 3 times down the margin with no accompanying text. Some historians dismiss it as random decoration. Others, like Dr. Helena Strauss, saw it differently. She believed Tamarat's symbol was a coded rebellion, an ancient signature of feminine witness against empire. And when the relief resurfaced in London, with that same eye newly recarved, it seemed almost certain. Someone, somewhere remembered her. Who carved it, and why? That remains the heart of the mystery. But to understand the horror that followed, we must return to that moment of condemnation, when the empire decided fear was safer than prophecy. Because from that point on, the punishments stopped being mere law. They became ritual. And rituals have a way of surviving long after those who perform them are dust. Years passed differently in a city built on fear. For Assyria, time hardened, like clay inscribed and left to bake in the sun. The execution of Tamaret was supposed to calm the palace, to seal the mouth of prophecy, but silence, once forced, begins to echo. At first it was whispers. A servant claimed she heard faint singing near the temple well, where purification waters were drawn. Others muttered that the queen's fever never ended. Cloths soaked from her sweating were burned daily in the courtyard, soiled water tossed into the gardens until the flowers blackened. The palace gardeners started refusing to tend the spot. They described the soil as hot to the touch. When one apprentice ignored warnings, thinking others superstitious, he returned pale and shaking, clutching handfuls of scorched petals. "There was an eye," he gasped, "in the roots, watching." Dr. Helena Strauss read these accounts years later in the museum's sealed archive, translated, cross-referenced, half-believed. The original records came from an unearthed chamber beneath the south wall of Nineveh, a cache of tablets possibly hidden by Saruatir himself in his final years. They formed what appeared to be a private chronicle, entries not of kings and wars but of omens unpermitted. One passage, rough and hurried, documented the year following the seer's death. "The queen yet lives, but her shadow precedes her. She speaks to things unseen. The temple women mark their faces with crescent ash and keep stones beneath their tongues, saying they still hear the voice of the goddess. At night, torches fail without wind. The king orders louder hymns." These were the first signs something deep within Assyria's spiritual machinery, meticulously engineered over centuries, had fractured. To the priests, such anomalies were dangerous precisely because they made no sense. Gods demand order, but every omen broke that law. In one story passed down through oral fragment, a young apprentice scribe named Nabuzakar was assigned to copy tax ledgers for the royal livestock pens. So he tells in later confessions scratched into the corner of a tablet never meant for history. The text wavers, uneven. His words seem hurried, as though carved while looking over his shoulder. "When I drew the sign for milk, my stylus broke. When I reached for another, there before me on the wet clay was drawn an eye. I swear by all gods I did not make it." He reported it to his overseer, who laughed and smudged the symbol away. That same night, thunder split the skies. A lightning strike set fire to the cattle sheds. The next morning, the apprentice was found scribbling the same eye, over and over, into his own palm with a flint shard. He lived 7 days after, muttering, "She sees still." Back in the modern day, Dr. Strauss recorded in her field diary how the ancient disturbances seemed mirrored by the archaeology itself. Objects misplaced, lights failing, and on one humid evening, an intern swore she heard someone whisper her name from inside an unopened trench. Helena didn't believe in folklore, but she understood psychological contagion, how fear leaps from one person's breath into another's bloodstream. Still, she noted it all because pattern is evidence, no matter how strange. She also noted one dream she could not shake, a figure kneeling in red dust, eyes blank, yet somehow aware. In the dream, she was whispering, not screaming. "Open again," said the woman. Helena woke with dry mouth and a pulse in her temples, like a drum inside the earth. Centuries before, Assyria itself seemed gripped by such fever dreams. The city's astrologers began reporting disturbances in the heavens, stars dimming at unpredictable hours, moon halos appearing in triplicate. These astronomer priests were the mathematicians of the age, men who calculated eclipses within fractions of days. To them, randomness was heresy of the sky. King Ashur-bel-Kala demanded reassurance. Instead, he received hesitation. One priest spoke out of turn during an audience, sweating through his robes. Majesty, the stars flicker not from dust nor from fire, but from remembrance. Remembrance. The king's voice echoed like iron plates struck together. The dead stir when named, my lord. They are being named again. By whom? The priest faltered, eyes darting toward the queen's balcony. The king's hand struck the armrest. Enough riddles. The punished are gone. That night the priest vanished before dawn prayers. His cell smelled of ozone, his cot blackened as if from inner flame. Queen Iltani's illness deepened into something less explicable. Witnesses describe her sleeplessness, her refusal to leave a certain chamber where tapestries hid the wall of judgment reliefs, stone carvings depicting the punishments of traitors and witches. Sometimes she could be heard conversing softly inside as though another woman answered her. When servants dared peek through the door, candle flames would lean sideways toward the queen, as if drawn by unseen wind. She sat staring at a small, polished disk of lapis, mirror or portal, none could tell. Her eyes, say the reports, gleamed violet under the flame. Saru-Atir, still alive then, prayed each night that whatever curse lingered would die with her. He copied the royal omens with mechanical obedience, but his private tablets tell another story written in code. Every seventh cuneiform mark, reverse direction, spelling through pattern what cannot be said plainly. The voice returns every night. It calls me by name. Not mine, but hers. To modern historians, such passages suggest psychological collapse brought on by guilt. To narrative investigators like Strauss, they are symptom and clue, the language of a bureaucrat unraveling under unseen weight. During her years reconstructing the tablets, Helena identified a recurring phenomenon. Wherever references to the eye appeared, material decay followed. The clay brittle, inscriptions faded as if heat-scorched. The chemical analysis found traces of copper oxide and sodium nitrate, the same mix produced by lightning strikes. Coincidence, her supervisor said grimly in a London symposium. Or continuity, Helena replied. Her colleagues laughed politely. Academia does not house spirits, yet that night the museum's low-light security camera caught a motion blur in the Assyrian exhibit. Human height, faint outline of a kneeling shape near the fragment labeled Punishment Relief, 900 BCE. The footage glitched for 6 seconds, then resumed, showing only stillness. In the morning, the plaque's descriptive card had curled from its frame, edges singed as if by tiny fire. Back in Assyria's own twilight, horror began wearing the mask of ceremony. New punishments arrived, methods never described before in the law tablets. Women guilty of sowing confusion through forbidden speech were not executed immediately. Instead, they were paraded masked, their eyes covered in polished copper. The ritual claimed to blind any lingering divine sight. And then, as the Chronicle of Saru-Atir records, their mouths were filled with dust in symbol of silence, and the dust sealed with tears. Tamarat's memory had become doctrinal procedure. The king called it the mercy of Asher, swift, public, final. The priest called it purification, but among servants the phrase to be mercied grew into slang for vanishing. Bodies were never recovered. Court log entries merely note, release completed. It is believed Saru-Atir was forced to design the phrasing, his stylus grinding out bureaucratic euphemisms, even as his conscience whispered rebellion. In one surviving letter, perhaps never sent, he writes, I serve the hammer that sculpts gods, but sometimes the hammer forgets it is not itself divine. As months bled into seasons, a drought struck the northern provinces, the very drought Tamarat had once foretold. Rivers thinned, crops failed. In desperation, the king demanded new prophecies. No priest dared speak. Then sudden thunder rolled across clear skies. Palace guards ran to the temple forecourt, where thousands had gathered unbidden. Women knelt wailing, not in madness but rhythmically, repeating an ancient song once sung during Ishtar's festivals, the call of the returning goddess. In their hands they carried clay amulets engraved with eyes. From the balcony, Queen Iltani stood pale and trembling, her fevered body wrapped in black silk. Behind her, the king shouted for dispersal, but the crowd's voices rose into a sound like surf, wordless, inexorable. When lightning struck the temple spire minutes later, witnesses swore they saw its blue branch divide into three, each arc descending toward the image of the goddess. Afterward, the crowd dispersed into silence. In the morning, every amulet's pupil had cracked outward, as if from internal heat. The chroniclers refused to record further detail, writing instead, "That day the city blinked." Thousands of years later, Helena Strauss unfolded one of those same cracked amulets in gloved hands. The fissure ran exactly where an anatomist would draw the optic nerve. Coincidence again? Or continuity? In her journal, she jotted a phrase, part scientific, part confessional. Perhaps memory is conductivity. Perhaps those punished carried not curse, but charge. That evening, while cataloging under lamplight, she thought she heard distant humming, low, harmonic, like wordless prayer. She turned off the lamp. The sound persisted faintly from somewhere beneath the floorboards. She almost called for Rafik. Instead, she pressed an ear to the wood. The hum seemed to shape syllables. She could not swear to it, but she thought the whisper said, ink. Assyria's final decades would see empire overreach itself, war in Babylon, rebellion among Medes, the torching of cities by hands once shackled by Assyrian chains. Historians mark this as political collapse. But within the capital sprang another rumor. Each city that rebelled was led, at least in myth, by a woman preacher who spoke not of gods or kings, but of justice with eyes open. One text recovered from Asher's ruins. A sermon fragment by a known author declares, "When they bound the prophets, they thought to kill hearing, yet hearing grows in dust, and dust remembers." To imperial rulers, such words were sedition. To those who had lost everything, they were prophecy fulfilled. In one last glimpse from Saruatir's secret tablets, likely written shortly before the empire's fall, his tone changes from chronicler to penitent. "The reliefs watch me as I write, their mouths open with no sound, yet in dream they speak. We forgive what you record, but not what you forget. Tomorrow they seal us in the library. If these words live, remember the price of obedience." He signed not with name, but with the now familiar symbol of the eye. Centuries erased the rest. Only in fragments scattered across museums and private collections, in relics smuggled through millennia, do these threads remain. But when Helena pieced them together, she felt the unmistakable heartbeat beneath scholarship. These weren't isolated objects. They were coordinates to a single buried event. A systematic terror disguised as law, preserved in art and punishment alike. Somewhere in those patterns, a voice wanted witness. And as every investigator learns, witness, once awakened, never sleeps again. The storm that once erased an artifact now seemed almost merciful, because deeper ruins still wait, those housing the full catalog of Assyrian female punishments, rituals beyond cruelty's purpose. In their translation lay the next descent, not into history, but into what history tries to bury. By the time Helena Strauss's team returned to the dig camp after the storm, the desert itself felt different. Less landscape, more wound. Great ridges of sand covered the excavation pits like hastily thrown shrouds. The morning heat hadn't yet arrived, but the scent that rose from the wetted clay was acrid, metallic, faintly like blood struck against bronze. What they could not know then was that the winds had not only torn away tents and documents, they had swept open something far older. Rafik found it first, a low hollow near the east trench where the gust had carved straight into ancient brickwork. It wasn't on any known map of the ruins. He called Helena over, his voice half thrill, half fear. "There's a chamber below this," he said, "or a tunnel." Helena dropped to her knees, brushing sand with slow, careful fingers, until her nails struck stone. The outline emerged, a doorway sealed with plaster so thin it cracked at her touch. Leaning close, she read the faint cuneiform impression on the lintel. "Lit narisula iskun," she murmured. Rafik frowned. "Meaning?" "It warns," she said softly. "Something like, 'Let no light be set here.'" By noon, the rest of the team had gathered round, whispering in languages of scholarship and superstition. Against Helena's better judgment, curiosity outweighed caution. They pried away a slab, peeled back darkness, and lowered a light. The chamber below was small, 6 strides by 4, but lined on every side with mud brick shelves stacked knee-high. Upon them sat clay cylinders bound with pitch resin. She recognized them instantly. Royal annals. Except these bore a second, smaller inscription along the rim, stamped after firing. Illegal copies. Hidden archives. Someone, thousands of years ago, had carved official history, then written another layer beneath it, like a second heartbeat. Helena felt the hairs on her arms rise. Whoever had hidden this collection had defied a king to do it. As Rafik photographed each object, she picked up one and brushed dust from its mouth. Where she expected to see the usual invocation, by command of Ashur, the great king, there sprawled something else in archaic script, almost poetic. We record the recorders, lest truth starve. She looked at Rafik. You see? He nodded slowly. Saru etir. Back in England, weeks later, reproductions of those same cylinders would force a quiet crisis in the museum world. Helena's translations revealed entries implied nowhere else. The dark bureaucracy of punishment in explicit detail. Here were royal decrees listing punishments by category: transgression, offender station, method of correction, witness requirement, offering recipient. One column turned her stomach. For the woman who prophesies without sanction, her hair is to crown the altar. Her bones, alphabet for future tongues. The text was at once formulaic and poetic, like law composed by poets gone mad. But the deeper Helena read, the clearer an uncanny logic emerged behind the cruelty. Each punishment mirrored a theological principle. To punish adultery was to appease Ashur, law of faithfulness. To punish blasphemy was to appease sin, the moon god of truth. To torture the visionary was to restore the order of vision itself. Every horror had symmetry, every cruelty, purpose. She wrote in her notes, Assyria institutionalized metaphysical surgery. They punished to heal what they believed was cosmic imbalance. Then across margins, she scrawled a single tremulous line. The punished were sacrifices disguised as convicts. The academics abroad doubted her. Chief among them was Dr. Lionel Heron, an authority on Near Eastern theology with a voice clipped by Oxford gentility. He dismissed her interpretation as over-romanticized mysticism masquerading as scholarship. In her office, Helena stared at the email until the words bled together like wet ink. For the first time, she felt anger bloom alongside fascination. That night, still buzzing, she decided to reread the final cylinder under different light spectrum imaging. The enhanced scan revealed shallow inscriptions on the interior surface, normally invisible without breaking the clay. Methods suggested whoever wrote them had poured slip inside, carved while the cylinder was half wet, then sealed it. Even as she enlarged the digital rendering, she caught her breath. The words spiraled inward instead of around, converging on a point, not a sentence but a pattern. The eye. Rafik, joining her on video call, leaned in close. That symbol again. It's not decoration, Helena said. It's directive. He shook his head. Directive for what? To look closer. In ancient Assyria, meanwhile, suspicion cracked the royal court like drought through sandstone. The drought persisted. Armies limped home with half their grain gone, half their men dead. Astrologers hid their eyes behind gauze, lest gods read fear there. Queen Iltani, gaunt, feverish, had her chambers sealed entirely. Servants swore her sleep was haunted by the seer she condemned. Some nights they heard long bursts of laughter that slid suddenly into weeping. Others found objects rearranged, a mirror turned to face the wall, a lamp still burning through its oil long gone. Rumors stretched further, that the king no longer approached her bed, that he muttered she brought eyes into his dreams. When his chief eunuch suggested new exorcisms, the monarch hurled his wine cup and roared, "No more priests! Give me soldiers who understand silence." Yet silence only deepened the unease. One incident survives almost intact, thanks to the terrified candor of a junior guard whose confession tablet was unearthed centuries later. He was on duty outside the Queen's chamber at the third moon of the drought year. During the last hour before dawn, the guard wrote, I heard two voices inside, though the Queen was alone. One pleaded softly, one answered from neither throat nor room. The window glowed, though torches were out. When I entered, the Queen knelt, facing the wall, speaking to engraving. She said, Forgive the fire. I know now it purified nothing. He fled and never returned. The official record labels him deserter, executed for cowardice. But among the recovered fragments in Helena's find, an administrative memo lists unexplained combustions in harem apartments, cause to be determined. In parallel, Helena's modern research began attracting unwanted publicity. A leak, perhaps accidental, spread the word about the new Assyrian female punishment texts. News headlines cheapened them into Torture of the Ancient Queens, Unearthed at Last. Television panels debated whether early civilizations were inherently misogynist. None grasped the breadth of her findings. This was not simple cruelty, but theology incarnate. Society's fear of women was indistinguishable from its fear of divine justice itself. Helena received an email from an unlisted address. They still see through what you unearthed. Stop before they remember fully. She dismissed it as crank mail. Yet the next morning, the lights in her study flickered twice, and every monitor logged a temperature spike, though the sensors showed no source of heat. One of the digital images, her scan of the spiral text, corrupted overnight. When reopened, the file displayed a different pattern. Faint grayscale distortion forming what, at casual glance, resembled an outline of a kneeling figure. She whispered to herself, No, just a glitch. But a strange warmth emanated from the screen, enough to fog her glasses. Thousands of years back, the spiral of suspicion had reached the kingship itself. The royal scribes, Saru Atir among them, were summoned before a tribunal. Their duty was to explain why certain decrees, previously excised, reappeared in the libraries of provincial temples, the same hidden cylinders Helena would someday find. Saru Atir stood shackled before the high judge, his ink-stained hands trembling. You have falsified sacred record, the judge thundered. Not falsified, he replied. Preserved. For whom? For whoever loves truth more than fear. The blow came fast. The stylus handle split his lip. You write only what kings command. He spat blood onto the floor. Then truth is condemned. Witness descriptions end there. The rest of his deposition likely burned. But his prison inventory lists one additional confiscated item. A tablet etched with concentric circles around a central symbol, an eye. Officially, the case closed with judgment. Saru Atir, unfaithful scribe, rendered to silence for treachery. Unofficially, his cell was sealed, not emptied. Later archaeological core samples taken from that sector show vitrified stone, as if exposed to sudden extreme heat. Among Helena's group, discussions grew tense. Half doubted continued excavation, half demanded they dig deeper. She noticed Rafiq's hands shaking when he handled artifacts, though he swore he was fine. One dusk, as the sun bled purple behind the dunes, he brought her a tablet newly brushed from sand. Its inscription began with formulaic invocation, but shifted midway into personal speech, rare in such documents. If any future reader finds these words, know that the eyes of the condemned are not closed but transferred. Their sight becomes the curse of those who seek remembrance. It was signed again by Saru Atir. Helena exhaled. Transferred, she repeated. He meant guilt, Rafiq said. Metaphor. She wasn't so sure. Or inheritance. That night she dreamed the inscription again, but in it, the letters rearranged fluidly into English, her own language. It read, If you read, you inherit. When she awoke, her contact lenses burned her eyes raw. In the washroom mirror, faint pink capillaries formed radial lines around each pupil, a pattern disturbingly like cuneiform wedges. Meanwhile, centuries back, Assyria imploded. Armies of Medes and Chaldeans tore through once invincible cities. Fire devoured Nineveh's libraries, melting tablets into glassy lumps. In one survivor's fragmentary poem carved later on exile stone, He writes, "We burn knowledge to blind the gods we created." Legends whispered that in the last days, women walked openly in the streets, unmasked, singing that same lament the punished priestess had first spoken. Some said walls bled, others said rain fell red with iron dust. Saru-Atir vanished from all records. Only one late Babylonian chronicle mentions the scribe who followed eyes into night. Helena's unfolding horror mirrored theirs, one layer of civilization haunting another. No longer could she pass the museum's storage gallery without glimpses, reflections in glass cases shifting when she didn't move, the kneeling woman again and again, waiting. When she finally returned to Iraq for one last field season, she brought with her a private plan to uncover Saru-Atir's reputed tomb if it existed. She and Rafik spent nights scouring drone topography until they located an unnatural depression several meters from previous trenches, an outline roughly rectangular, length of a small chamber. They began excavation before dawn to avoid bureaucratic interference. Sand surrendered grudgingly, grain by grain. Hours passed until Helena's spade struck stone, smooth, fitted, deliberate. Beneath lay a slab carved not with royal emblems, but with that same spiral of text leading inward to an eye. Around its border ran 12 identical marks, styluses crossing each other, as if forming barred gates. As she knelt, brushing dirt from the sign, Rafik whispered, "Professor, the airs," the sound cut off. Space itself seemed to hum. The sun stood sharp above them, yet the trench dimmed into strange twilight. Helena felt the vibration in her chest before she heard it, a wordless pulse that resembled chanting from far below. The sand beneath the slab trembled faintly, like ground exhaling warm breath. She reached for Rafik's wrist. "Step back." He shook his head. "We've opened it already." Another tremor, stronger. From beneath the slab rose the smell of old ashes mingled with myrrh. A fissure snaked across the stone. For one bare instant, she thought she saw, not darkness below, but a faint light as if from embers. And in that glow, a relief carving of the kneeling priestess. The fissure widened. A burst of dry air hit them, and with it, something faintly audible, impossible, a whisper that carried the weight of centuries. 2 syllables, sibilant, unmistakable. "Remember." Helena staggered back. The world snapped to ordinary brightness. The slab lay solid again. Rafik clutched his head, murmuring a prayer. "What did you hear?" she asked. He looked at her as though seeing someone else. "My name," he said hoarsely, but not in my language. That evening, in the quiet of the portable lab, Helena replayed the audio from her field recorder. The device had captured only static at first, then an abrupt frequency spike near 30 hertz. When visualized on the waveform editor, the spike formed a distinct spiral pattern. Her lungs tightened. Each repetition of the word or sound resembled the concentric lines carved by Saru-Atir. When she closed her eyes, she felt a presence behind cognition itself, something patient, luminous, neither benign nor malevolent, simply waiting. It wasn't curse, it wasn't ghost, it was memory waking. And there it lingered, a centuries-old question reanimated. Were those punished by Assyrian kings damned women, or unwilling guardians of what power refused to face? Helena tried writing her final report that night, but words dissolved into shaky ink loops. What emerged instead on the page, unbidden, was the eye. She laughed a little, too tired, too afraid. "Guilty souls cursed by God," she muttered to herself, "or victims of madness." Her pen stilled. She looked squarely into the dark reflection of her monitor. Her own eyes doubled there. "Or witnesses," she whispered. "What do you think? Guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness? Tell us below. Your theories matter here." Night fell upon the excavation camp with a peculiar stillness, as if the wind were holding its breath. The desert, normally restless, seemed to pause, listening. Inside her tent, Dr. Helena Strauss sat amid crates of artifacts and notebooks sprawled open across the canvas floor. The oil lamp quivered. Its flame reached upward in thin spear points that trembled without breeze. Rafik had gone to the nearby village for supplies. She was alone except for the whispering rustle of paper. She lifted one of the new tablets they had unearthed beside the spiral slab. Its surface glistened faintly, still slick from the preservation mist. Across it ran both cuneiform and crude later scratches in Aramaic, proof that someone, centuries after the empire fell, had reopened the tomb and written upon it again. The later marks translated roughly, "Do not awaken the language of punishment, for it remembers the shape of breath." Helena frowned at the phrasing. Language that remembered breath? She reached for her recorder. Personal log, day 79, translation incomplete, possible post-Assyrian intervention by temple remnants or early necromantic cult. Phrase suggests phonetic rituals tied to sentence recitation. Vocal resonance as invocation. Could indicate these tablets weren't meant to be read, only spoken. She paused, listening to the playback. The words came back thin through the speaker, but underneath her own voice ran a faint undertone. A second whisper, repeating the last phrase. Meant to be read, only spoken. Helena froze. After a long silence, she shut off the device. Acoustics, she muttered. Feedback. Yet the explanation felt hollow even as she offered it to herself. She turned her attention to the cylinder that had absorbed her for days. Saru Atir's final piece. The spiral text, once incomprehensible, had begun to reveal structure. Each inward rotation alternated a line from royal decree with a line of prayer, mirror, and refutation intertwined. Translated, they made a conversation between law and conscience. Outermost ring. By order of the king, the false seer shall be broken. Next. By order of heaven, her voice shall stand unbroken. Further in, the scribe shall seal truth in fire. Next line, fire shall unseal the scribe. It went on like that, descending into call and answer, until the center where only 5 words appeared. Tiny, deliberate, almost tender. We see what sees us. Helena touched the phrase with a gloved fingertip, feeling for engraving depth. The texture was shallow, as though inscribed not with stylus, but nail. When she closed her eyes, light pulsed faintly behind her eyelids, a reddish glow shaped like molten script. A low sound began in her ears, rhythmic, not random. Like many voices murmuring a text in synchronization. She blinked and the tent darkened, shadows thickening toward the edges as if depth itself bent around that single tablet. Oil popped in the lamp. Another voice flickered through her mind, dry, ancient, without accent. Record us and become record. Her hands clenched. No, she whispered aloud. You're an artifact, nothing more. But the reply came immediately. So were they. Meanwhile, beyond the fragile canvas, something took form in the desert night. Locals would later speak of strange lights drifting low over the dunes, of radio interference stretching across kilometers, of livestock refusing water from wells. One shepherd, interviewed years after, remembered seeing near midnight a shimmer like heat, and within it, a woman kneeling in the sand, hair like night water. He said she lifted her head once and looked toward the mound of the ancient city. Then she closed her eyes, and the air smelled suddenly of myrrh and ozone, storm and sanctity at once. Moments later, lightning struck without thunder. Hours before dawn, Helena awoke on her cot to absence of sound. The generator had failed. She rose, stepped outside, and stared in disbelief. The distant horizon glowed dull crimson, as if fire burned beneath the sand itself. Rafik stumbled toward her, clutching a lantern. It started 30 minutes ago, he gasped. No flames, only light. The ground shakes. The entire desert seemed to hum faintly, a frequency half heard, half felt. They hurried down to the trench where the slab lay half reburied after previous collapse. The light rose directly from there, from cracks along its surface. Helena dropped to her knees, heart hammering. It's not heat. Look, the sand hasn't fused. Indeed, the light was cold, phosphorescent, steady. When it brightened, she could make out faint images moving within, reliefs that weren't carved yesterday. Figures appeared and vanished across the stone. Women kneeling, guards, a scribe. Rafik whispered, "Professor, she's looking at us." The image of Tamarat had turned her carved head, eyes meeting theirs. For an instant, the mouth moved. No sound, yet Helena somehow felt the word vibrate in her skull. Remember. Then the light stilled. The slab was plain again. Rafik crossed himself. "We must call Baghdad authority before morning," he said, but she remained staring. "No, we document. We don't flee." He stepped closer, trembling. "If this is cursed, Professor, then curse his data," she snapped. He said nothing. Both of them knew this wasn't science anymore, yet neither could stop. Once long ago, in another dawn, the Assyrian palace had witnessed its own spectacle of light. The chronicle of that day lay among Saruatir's cylinders, now half-translated on Helena's laptop. She read it even as the desert wind began outside, each gust dragging cloth against cloth like whispered tablets sliding. In the days of the final drought, the queen rose cleansed of fever and summoned the court. She spoke before the throne, though unbidden. In her hands she carried no incense but the ashes of her own veils. She said, "Let the punishments end, or they shall return upon us doubled." The king laughed and called for guards, but the walls themselves replied in thunder. After that, the text descended into erratic lines, description or hallucination impossible to judge, light interrupting from the statue's eyes, blood of clay weeping through carvings, voices naming each punishment backward until air turned to flame. Helena could hardly breathe as she scrolled. Saruatir's final entry. The king fell. The queen vanished. The city burns from inside stone. I hear Tamarat singing, though her bones are dust. She says the word mercy, but it sounds like fire. The wind outside struck the tent furiously, then stopped altogether. Absolute silence. Helena looked up. Through a tear in the canvas roof, the stars had disappeared. Not clouded, simply absent. A spreading void replaced them, black as obsidian. Her tablet screen flickered and displayed characters rearranging themselves beyond her control. The file labeling changed to read, I_record_1. Rafik shouted from outside, "Come out, quickly!" When she emerged, the entire site shimmered with faint color. The dunes shaped themselves into fleeting reliefs, faces, hands, hieroglyphs, one after another rising from sand like smoke and dissolving. Rafik stood pointing toward the ridge. A tall figure stood silhouetted there, the fabric of its robes fluttering without wind. It was indistinct, made of light and dust, but kneeling. Helena felt her throat close. It's her. They took one step forward. The figure bowed its head slowly, as if acknowledging. Then it extended a hand. The air shook. A sound rolled over them. Not loud, yet it penetrated bone. A chorus of thousands breathing a single syllable in unison. The word was ancient Akkadian, but somehow they both understood. Witness. In that instant, Helena saw everything. She was standing in twin time frames at once. Assyria on the eve of ruin and the present camp under starlight. The punished women screamed yet sang, eyes ablaze. Beside them, Saruatir wrote furiously on tiles that cracked under heat. Tamarat turned, meeting Helena's gaze across eternity. Her skin burned away into light, leaving only the symbol of the open eyes suspended before the collapsing palace. Then all fell silent again. Helena was back on her knees beside Rafik in the sand. The figure on the ridge was gone. The wind returned, ordinary, cruel, mercifully empty. Later, in the medical tent after dawn, Rafik sat shaking, wrapped in a blanket. "We saw them," he whispered. "We saw the condemned." Helena stared at her hands. Fine trails of dust formed patterns along her palms, tiny, cuneiform wedges that faded when wiped. "Maybe we didn't see ghosts," she said softly. "Maybe we saw memory replaying itself. Civilization's black box finally opening." Then what did it want? She looked out through the tent flap at the sun rising over ruins. To be believed. Weeks later, back in London, she delivered her closed report to the British Museum Board. The official transcript exists but diverges sharply from her private notes. In the filed version, she described anomalies as optical interference combined with heat haze. In her diary, she wrote, "The punished endured unspeakable fates, but in preserving record, they achieved what empires cannot: immortality through suffering." Saruatir's cylinders, Tamarat's prophecy, the Queen's repentance, each encoded the same secret. Truth demands witness, no matter the cost. They carved horror so we would one day read it and remember. Then one last line, scrawled just before the ink ran out: "If you stand in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice?" Days after the report's submission, an anonymous package arrived at her flat. Inside lay an unmarked clay fragment, half the size of her palm, engraved with a single eye. No sender, no customs declaration. She placed it on her desk, meaning to call security, but fatigue overcame her. When she woke at 3:12 a.m., the fragment was warm. She touched it. A thin crack ran across its center, a pulse of dull luminescence breathing softly between beats. A sound drifted from it, faint as wind through reeds. A woman's voice, not pleading but instructing. "Record what is forgiven. Tell them we were here." Helena wept quietly then, because she finally understood what the Assyrian punishments had truly been: a language written in pain, demanding translation through ages. She switched on her recorder. "This is Helena Strauss," she whispered. "The record continues." A pause. Then her next words: "Steady. Reverent. I believe them." The world would call her discovery legend, curse, fraud, depending on the audience. But somewhere in a locked storage vault under the museum, lights occasionally flicker at random intervals. Security logs capture audio anomalies, rhythmic patterns like distant stylus tapping on clay. Technicians explain it as climate systems. Curators nod and move on. Only one night guard, veteran and superstitious, confided years later to a journalist, "Sometimes I swear the eyes on those carvings, they blink. If you stood in that room, surrounded by all that carved testimony, under the hum of the cameras and the whisper of the vents, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer." Morning always looks too clean after catastrophe. When the sun climbed above the ruins at Nineveh the next day, tents rippled like the lungs of something reawakening. Reporters swarmed before Helena even reached the satellite phone. Rumor had outrun both scholarship and reason. Archaeologists find tomb of the prophetess. Ancient temple comes alive. Woman scientist witnesses the curse of Assyria. Every network wanted interviews. Every museum wanted rights. But every official statement Helena gave was the same measured prose of a career survivor. "We have discovered culturally significant ritual inscriptions. No further comment pending authentication." Behind her polite caution grew a storm no desert would ever match, an intellectual panic rippling across the academic world. The Assyria dossier she delivered to London was classified internally for review. Curators whispered of psychological duress and potential contamination of artifacts. Government officials urged restraint. Translation leaks might inflame regional politics. Yet the story found its way out. A graduate assistant photographed one page of Helena's private notes and posted it anonymously online. "We record the recorders, lest truth starve." Within hours, the phrase spread through history forums, then headlines, then protest signs. News anchors recited it with equal parts fascination and disbelief. Theologians dissected it on late-night broadcasts. Voices from feminist circles reclaimed Tamarat's legend as a banner of resistance. Artists painted the Eye of Ishtar on city walls from Berlin to Sao Paulo. "A civilization 4,000 years dead," one columnist wrote, "has forced us to ask what our empires still punish into silence." Meanwhile, the museum faced its own haunting. Visitors complained of low vibrations while viewing the Assyrian gallery. Security felt sudden warmth around certain cases. Twice, alarms triggered themselves at precisely 3:12 a.m., the same minute Helena had recorded her final entry in the desert. Technical staff, cornered by journalists, called it electrical drift. The night guard who mentioned blinking statues was reassigned to archives toward quieter corridors. Yet behind locked departmental doors, those who read Helena's uncensored translations could not look at the reliefs the same way again. They understood at last the punishments function not merely as terror, but as documentation, a theological recording device carved into bodies, meant to transmit divine order through suffering. And by unearthing it, humanity had tuned itself once more to that ancient frequency. The official channels dealt as bureaucracies do, with paperwork. A disciplinary hearing reviewed Helena's conduct, breaches of safety protocols, unverified statements, unsolicited contact with media. She listened in silence, expression calm. A senior director concluded the reprimand with weary irony. "You've turned Assyriology into a ghost story." She met his eyes, smiled faintly. "It was one, sir, long before I arrived." He cleared his throat, dismissed her. Afterward, in the museum cafe, she stirred tea that had long gone cold. On the wall above her hung a photograph of the original relief, the kneeling woman beneath the king. Security glass shimmered faintly beneath fluorescent lamps. For just an instant, the angle of the light changed, and the woman's lips seemed parted, mid-breath, mid-word. Helena froze. The reflection passed, but the tea trembled in her cup. Outside the professional sphere, fascination deepened into folklore. Podcasts retold the saga as supernatural thriller. Documentaries speculated about ancient sound frequencies. Churches in America quoted Tangri and Asher parallels during sermons warning against hubris. And in Iraq, local guides began recounting the tale not as curse, but as reparation, the land remembering its women. Visitors left offerings of herbs near the sealed trench. A week later, they began appearing mysteriously on the museum steps in London as well, wrapped neatly in date leaves. No one claimed responsibility. For Helena herself, the aftermath carried quiet rather than glory. She resigned her formal post, retreated to a small house on the Cornish coast. There she taught part-time online, wrote in notebooks filled with both linguistic diagrams and sketches of spirals. She numbered them Eyes 112. Of Rafiq, little is known. He later took a curator position in Herbal, avoiding interviews. In a rare letter, he thanked Helena but added, "Some remembering is better left unseen." She kept that letter on her desk beneath the fragment. The eye carved upon clay, now cooled permanently, the crack sealed with clear resin. Beneath its case on a scrap of paper, she copied words once hidden inside Saruatir's cylinder. "Fire shall unseal the scribe." When storm nights rolled over the sea, she sometimes thought she heard tapping from inside the case. A deliberate rhythm, stylus finding clay. Perhaps water condensation. Perhaps continuity. The wider field of ancient law transformed in subtle ways. Scholars no longer dismissed the human cost behind codes of empire. Conferences debated ethics of display, the right of victims, even millennia dead, to silence. Students quoted Helena's final interview. "Civilization is built on record, but until we record compassion, our archives remain half missing." Reviews called her legacy controversial. Publishers requested memoirs she never delivered. Instead, she left a final recording. 3 minutes of her voice, calm, intimate, stored in the museum's digital memorial archive. It ends without preamble or sign-off. "They wanted witnesses and not worshippers. We became both. What the kings built with terror, we might yet redeem through honesty. Every empire writes its love letters in someone else's blood. The least we can do is read them aloud." Then silence, followed by faint ambient resonance at 30 hertz, the same unheard note logged beneath the desert. Technicians left it intact. Decades later, school children touring the Assyrian gallery still pause longest before the punishment relief. The guide's speech remains cautious, factual, 28 seconds timed by protocol. And yet, now and then, a child tilts his head, squints at the carved woman's face, and whispers, "She's blinking." No one argues anymore whether it's trick of light or trick of faith. History has already chosen both. Listen closely in that quiet museum hall. The hum of the lights, the slow breathing of the air vents, the soft echo of shoes on marble. Every sound seems ordinary until you remember what lies behind the glass. Each carved eye on those Assyrian stones stares outward across 4,000 years, still asking the same thing. Do you believe us now? Helena's discovery changed more than scholarship. It changed what we mean by remembrance itself. The empire that sought to silence women instead carved their endurance into eternity. Whether you call it justice or haunting, one truth endures. The records never stop speaking. We simply stop listening. So what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled or buried again to protect the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep digging into humanity's darkest histories, like this video and subscribe for next week's story.